A careful study of the Egyptian zodiacs brings us to the following important observation. Some of the figures have no supporting accessories underneath them whatsoever, they are simply drawn as objects in the sky. Other figures from the very same zodiacs are explicitly drawn as standing on something, either boats, snakes, which are often curved in such a way that they resemble boats, or other objects. One and the same symbol can be drawn without a supporting base in one position on the zodiac, and seen riding some object elsewhere or floating upon said object. Here we see a fragment of the long zodiac of Dendera. Among the planetary rod-bearing figures, we see the two that look perfectly the same, male figures with the heads of falcons and planetary rods in their hands. All the indications tell us that we see the same planet. One of such figures can be seen to the left of Aquarius, whilst the other is at a considerable distance from the first figure on the right. There are many other figures between these two. Therefore, despite their being absolutely identical to one another, one can hardly consider them to stand for the same planet in the same position. Had this been the case, the figures would be drawn much closer to each other, and located on the same side of Aquarius. They must stand for something else, and we should be able to see the differences in the symbolism used for both, otherwise, the zodiac would be illegible in principle. However, both figures look exactly the same. The matter is that one of them doesn't appear to be standing upon anything special, whereas the other is standing atop the figure of a goose, as if it were using it for a flotation device. One can cite many similar examples. Virtually in every zodiac we see certain objects, not just the planetary symbols, stand on top of other objects, most often boats or snakes, or various animal figures. Let us cite a fragment of another zodiac, the lesser zodiac of Esna. We see a number of figures standing in boats or atop snakes. Here is another such example that pertains to the zodiacs of Athribis. The transposition symbols were used very widely in the compilation of the Egyptian zodiacs, and an artful use of them allowed the ancient Egyptian artists and astronomers cram several horoscopes into a single zodiac at once. One primary horoscope and up to 4 secondary ones. And in some cases, even several primary horoscopes, which is the case in Brooks' zodiac. It would suffice to mark the planets of the secondary horoscopes using transposition symbols to avoid confusion with the primary horoscope's planets. Thus, the method in question would allow them to use the same symbol for the primary and the secondary horoscope and be able to distinguish between the two. As for the confusion between the secondary horoscope's planets, it would be minimal due to the fact that each secondary horoscope is rigidly affixed to one and the same position on the ecliptic, namely, the respective solstice or equinox point. Apart from that, the transposition method would allow the Egyptian artists to distribute zodiacal figures across the entire field of the drawing. For instance, to transpose some of the figures from their rightful positions which are too cluttered up by other figures. When the sun is shining in the sky, sunlight renders the stars and the planets invisible. We can only see bright stars when the sun is some 10 arc degrees below the horizon. In the moderate latitudes the stars and the planets become visible about 1 hour after sunset, and cease to be visible when there's about the same amount of time left until the edge of the sun emerges from beyond the horizon. The further to the south, the less this period of time. It roughly equals 40 minutes near the equator. In the south, the angle between the sun and the horizon is closer to 90 degrees, which is why dusk and dawn come quicker than in the north. While the sun remains within the limits of 10 degrees below the horizon, it is daytime or a bright enough twilight. We see no stars or planets, excepting the moon. Venus and some of the brighter stars can also be an exception. If one planet or another gets too close to the Sun in its visible motion, it disappears from sight. External planets, Jupiter, Saturn and Mars, whose orbital radiuses are greater than that of the Earth, disappear from sight relatively rarely. Unlike the external planets, Venus and Mercury disappear from sight several times each year, which would often make them invisible in the primary horoscope of a given Egyptian zodiac. This was pointed out by Morozov, who had discovered that the visibility or invisibility of a given planet would be meticulously indicated in the Egyptian zodiacs. For instance, in the zodiacs of Dendera, such indicators are drawn as stars near the heads of the planetary figures. The authors have verified this hypothesis of Morozov, and it turned out to be perfectly true. The visibility or invisibility of a given planet would indeed be indicated in the Egyptian zodiacs, all the more meticulously for the planets which are close to the Sun. These indicators could become omitted for the planets at a distance from the Sun, since their very position in relation to the solar would make them visible by default. Nevertheless, visibility indicators are given for the planets located at a greater distance from the Sun as well. These visibility indicators would most often attain the shape of stars near the heads of the planetary figures. However, in the Eb zodiac from the Greater Temple of Esna, for instance, we find invisibility indicators instead, namely, the figures of the invisible planets would have a solar disk over their heads or instead of them. The symbolism is perfectly clear: the planet is invisible because the Sun obscures its face. The use of such symbolism indicates that Egyptian astronomers had a good understanding of the true nature of the process and its mechanism. Visibility and invisibility indicators are usually just found in the primary horoscopes of the Egyptian zodiacs. However, one occasionally finds them in the secondary zodiacs as well. Mercury could occasionally assume both positions over the course of time ciphered in a given zodiac, which could be an interval of several days. In such cases it could be drawn twice, once in the visible position, and once more in the invisible. In their research, Fomenko and Nosovsky accounted for planetary visibility indicators as well as the secondary horoscopes. It turns out that there is a precise astronomical solution for each of the Egyptian zodiacs that they studied, one that satisfies to the specifications set by the primary horoscope as well as secondary horoscopes and visibility indicators. Equinox and solstice points are represented by means of special symbols in Egyptian zodiacs. This symbolism is characterized by very high stability. It is encountered in different kinds of zodiacs without alterations. Therefore, the equinox and solstice symbols can be classified as the most easily legible symbols of the Egyptian zodiacs. Equinox and solstice symbols are of paramount importance for astronomical dating. They mark the locations of secondary horoscopes in Egyptian zodiacs. Some of these symbols are still interpreted completely erroneously in Egyptologist literature. Here we see Egyptian signs and figures that relate to the autumn equinox point. These symbols are always drawn in the same place of any Egyptian zodiac, the vicinity of Virgo, which is where the autumn equinox point is located. Some of them may also refer to the symmetrical vernal equinox point, and, consequently, turn up in the region of Pisces. Let us provide a list of said symbols. Human figure holding a small child in one hand and making a benediction gesture with the other. This symbol is found in the autumn equinox point on both Dendera zodiacs. The meaning of these symbols becomes clear if we are to remember that the Egyptian year started in September, around the day of autumn equinox. It is possible that the infant figure symbolizes the new year, very young, newly born, as it were. Rectangular tablet with some semblance of lettering. In reality, there is no lettering, however, there are wavy lines on the tablet that appear to stand for inscriptions. Two such tablets are present in the round zodiac of Dendera, in the points of autumn and spring equinox. A leonine figure reclines against the tablet. This might refer to the constellation Leo, from which the sun reaches the point of the autumn equinox. In general, equinox symbols in Egyptian zodiacs would sometimes include drawings of neighboring constellations, Leo for autumn equinox and Aries for vernal equinox. Crowned human figure sitting on a chair, symmetrically holding two identical scepters or vessels in both hands. Apparently, the symbol refers to the equality of day and night. The figure appears to be weighing two jugs or scepters, finding them to be of equal weight. They symbolize the equal durations of day and night. This symbol appears only once, in the round zodiac of Dendera. The snake whose body is woven into a double figure of 8. The symbol appears on several zodiacs, specifically, the long zodiac of Dendera, the lesser zodiac of Esna, and the lower zodiac of Athribis, out of all those studied, always at the point of the autumn equinox. Symmetrical convoluted body of a snake with two identical cobra heads, one on each end. Sometimes the symmetrical snake would also have two identical pairs of wings with a tiny beetle in between, the symmetry of the symbol remaining intact. Such symbols can be found in points of autumn and vernal equinox. The autumnal variety can be seen in zodiac EB. This symbol also appears to convey the idea of day and night being symmetrical, or equal. Crossed-out stand with a figure, of either a bird or a human in known zodiacs, upon it. This symbol could stand for either equinox. It also needs to be pointed out that if the stand isn't crossed out, the symbol in question is one of solstice and not equinox. In this case, the stand usually supports a cobra with its head raised. The crossing out must have also expressed the idea of symmetry. A figure with 4 heads, which can also stand for either equinox. In Brooks' zodiac, the equinox and solstice symbols are located in corners, and the autumn equinox symbol is on the side of autumnal constellations. It looks like a winged animal with an equine body and 4 ovine heads, 2 facing either way. In the inner zodiac of Ptahsiris, the autumn equinox symbol is right next to Virgo. It looks like a male figure with 4 heads. Symbols that stand for the winter solstice point in the constellation of Sagittarius can be seen here. Let us list them. In nearly every single zodiac, the winter solstice point with a minimal horoscope, Sun, Mercury and Venus, is part of the Sagittarian symbol, since the point in question is located in Sagittarius. Therefore, the portrayal of Sagittarius was a complex compound symbol, uniting the actual figure of Sagittarius, as a centaur wielding a bow, and the symbols of the Sun, Mercury and Venus, planets that were in Sagittarius on the day of winter solstice. Let us cite a drawing that will make it clearer how Egyptian artists managed to combine all these assorted pieces of information into an astronomical hieroglyph. The Sun, Venus and Mercury comprise a minimal secondary horoscope. The Sun is part of any secondary horoscope by definition. But the same is true about Venus and Mercury, since they never travel too far away from the Sun. As for other planets, their presence in secondary horoscope is a matter of chance. Let us now diverge from the astronomical topic for a while. Pay attention to the fact that Sagittarius was often depicted holding a recurve bow, which is obvious by its characteristic reverse curve. However, it is known from the history of armaments that recurve bows with limbs that curve away from the archer have only been introduced in the 11th century AD. They were considered an expensive weapon even towards the end of the Middle Ages, since their manufacture was an extremely complex task in the days of yore. Such bows have only been used by sportsmen since the middle of the 20th century and the invention of special synthetic materials. Prior to that, simple bows were used in sports. The shooting range of a recurve bow is only limited by the strength of an archer's hands and may exceed that of a crossbow. It is believed that Mongolian, or Russian, according to the author's reconstruction, troops were armed by such bows, likewise the Turkish janissaries. Russian bows were of this sort, which is evident from the shape of the surviving quivers as well as ancient artwork that depicts Russian warriors. This makes us wonder about just how this elite medieval weapon ended up in the extremely ancient Egyptian zodiacs. Incidentally, this is one of history's mysteries spawned by the erroneous chronology of Scaliger and Petavius. Namely, it is presumed that artful representations of composite bows with recurved limbs came into existence 30 centuries before the Common Era, no less. However, they have only been in use since the 11th century AD. What do we come up with as a result? An interval of 4 millennia, no less, between the invention of the bow and its introduction into military practice? This is impossible. The entire history of armaments tells us that new weapons are immediately tested in action. The astronomical datings that the authors have come up with give us an exhaustive answer to this question. Apparently, all these zodiacs were created after the 11th century AD. Therefore, there is little wonder that they depict medieval recurve bows. Cobra on a stand with its head raised and its neck stretched upwards. An identical or similar symbol could also indicate the summer solstice point. Other figures could be depicted here in lieu of the cobra. For instance, in the round zodiac of Dendera, the stand in the point of winter solstice is occupied by the head of an animal with a circle between horizontal horns. It is significant that in this case, the stand isn't crossed out and that the animal upon it hasn't got 4 heads. Otherwise, it would be an equinox symbol, and not one of solstice. It is possible that Egyptian artists adhered to a general idea of some sort by trying to emphasize horizontal symmetry in equinox symbolism, and vertical in case of solstice symbolism. Although there are exceptions. For instance, the sign of a symmetrical 2-headed cobra was occasionally used to indicate the summer solstice point. Fantasy animal that looks like a winged bull. It was usually depicted with an ovine head. The important detail is that there was just 1 head, not 4, otherwise the symbol would represent an equinox and not a solstice. In the lesser zodiac of Esna, such animals are located at solstice points and aligned vertically. It may have been done in order to emphasize the vertical direction of the figures. A similar animal was used to indicate the point of summer solstice. The scene where the man with a falcon's head kills a calf with a spear. In Brooks' zodiac, this symbol is placed in between Cancer and Gemini, or at the point of summer solstice. In all cases, the calf lacks front legs. Usually just 1 hind leg is drawn with a rope tied to it. The whole meaning of the scene remains rather unclear. However, it is apparently related to solstice points in some way, since in every known case it is observed in the vicinity of these points.